Continuing our journey through the book of Proverbs. And this morning we come to chapter 3. And in Proverbs chapter 3, there is a bit of you might wonder why I'm calling this sermon the happy place. We all want a happy place, and we all want to find that happy place. I don't know about you, but when life kind of gets chaotic, there is a happy place that I do go to, and no, I'm not going to tell you where it is, because it's my place, and I don't want you intruding, all right? But I do have a spot that when things are a little bit chaotic, I can go and sit, I can listen to the birds, I can watch and just enjoy. I'm not going to give you more details so you don't track me down, but there's a place that I like to go. It's quieting and it's calming for my soul. I don't know what the happy place is for you. For some people, they like to get out to the cabin or get off to vacation and enjoy the Caribbean waters, the ocean breezes, and the sand between your toes. For some teenagers, it's going off to their room, closing the door, getting on their device, just protecting themselves from that outside world and filtering everything there. But we all have a place, a happy place that we want to go to. We want to find it, we want to stay there, we want to be there, and as much as we can, we delight in that happy place. It might not be a physical place, it might actually be something that's more psychological, a place that you go to in your mind that just fills you with happy thoughts and with joy and peace. But regardless, we are all longing for the happy place, and we are all designed to long for a happy place. There's nothing wrong with wanting that. We have been designed to go and find a place that is restorative, renewing, refreshing to the soul. We want that. We absolutely want that. And the reason that we want that is because we were made for that. From the very beginning of the Bible, we find the happy couple, Adam and Eve, in the happy place. And they find themselves in the happy place where there is an abundance of goodness. There is fruit for them to enjoy, every tree and every green plant for them to eat. There is nothing that should cause them worry or fear. There is God who walks with them by day and by night. And this was the happy place. And interestingly, we all have this sense, this longing to go back to the garden, to go back to the Garden of Eden, to go back to this happy place. We all are longing for it. Ecclesiastes 3 will talk about how God has put eternity in our hearts, and this eternity in our hearts really is a longing for a happy place. You want it. You long for it. Humans just inevitably are trying to figure out how to eliminate problems, to get those problems away, and to get back to that happy place. But the problem that we face is that this happy place feels elusive. That you can enjoy it for maybe a moment, whether it's the cabin or the lake or the ocean or your room or that place in your mind, but something will come along that calls you back to reality, to everyday life. And in the midst of the busyness of life, and in the midst of the chaos, there's a sense in which you are tired, and you want to go back to that happy place. Proverbs 3 is driving us back to the happy place. And surprisingly, what Proverbs 3 is going to do is drive us back to Eden in a way that maybe you or I did not expect and that we didn't see at first, but it's littered all throughout these verses from verse 13 all the way through 35. There's evidence of this calling to take us back home, to take us back to Eden, to take us back to the garden so that we would find that place where, as David would pray in Psalm 16, he would pray these words, which is what our prayer ought to be this morning. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures evermore. Psalm 16:11. So this morning what I want to wrestle with is, how do we then find this happy place? Where is it? How do we get there? And then how do we stay there? So I want to take a look at four things that will help us to see the wisdom of Christ, as Proverbs is driving us to do, to see the wisdom of Christ in all things, so that we would return to that happy place that God designed, that Eden that God has prepared for us. So let's take a look at these four things. The first thing is we need to return to the happy place. Verses 12 through 18 describe for us how we return to this happy place. Verses 12 through 18, verses 13, it's not 12, verses 13 through 18, they actually begin and they end with the word blessed. Do you see that? Verse 13, blessed is the one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding. Verse 18, she is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her, and those who hold her fast are called blessed. All between verses 13 and 18 is the blessed life of how God is bringing us back to this place of joy and peace, this happy place that He has designed for us. Just as He had designed the Garden of Eden for Adam and Eve, so God is bringing us back. This is the call of God, to bring us back to His happy place. So how does He do that? This blessing is not typical. It's not the typical word that's used in the Old Testament to describe blessing. It actually has the sense of being happy, of being joyful, of enjoying God and of enjoying life. And all throughout, we hear the echoes of Eden, the Garden of Eden, through this passage. First, we'll see this because it begins with, blessed is literally the Adam, is how the Hebrew reads. Blessed is the man. In other words, this blessing is available for all who would pursue it. For anyone who would want the happy place, blessed is the one, the man, the Adam, who is searching, who is looking, who finds wisdom, we're told in verse 13, and the one who gets understanding. And this chapter then, this section is actually this ode, this blessing, this hymn of blessing to God for how He is desiring to bring us back home, to bring us so that we would return to Him. And there are 5 things that I want us to see, and I'm going to use 5-letter P's from these verses just to help us to see what God is doing to bring us back to Eden. The first is that we find it in verses 13 and 14, that there is a prophet that God has. We hear in verse 14 that the gain from wisdom is better than the gain from silver, and her profit better than gold. And so the profit then of returning back to God with His wisdom, with His insight, is that it's far better than anything in this world. All of the wealth, all of the riches. You can think of people who, in the gold rush in the early 1900s, they left their one side of the country, moved to the other in pursuit, in a diligent pursuit, to find gold. They would go and pan the streams just to find little bits of gold in the gold rush, the Yukon gold rush, the California gold rush. And they would go in pursuit, searching for gold. And God says, the one who does that kind of search, has that kind of diligence, who's willing to get up and cross the country and do whatever it takes to find wisdom, is one who is going to find more than silver or gold. There's a great profit in pursuing this wisdom. Eden was a land, we are told, that was lush, full, rich of gold and silver. But not only was it a land that had great profit, Eden was also described as being very precious. It had precious jewels. We're told that in Genesis 2, verse 12, that out of the streams there were all sorts of jewels, onyx and bdellium, and these fine jewels that made it a cosmic temple where God would dwell. And here what we find in verse 15, that wisdom is described as more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her. And so Jesus will describe the one who pursues wisdom, the one who pursues the kingdom of God, Matthew 13, verses 33 through 35. It's like a man who goes in search of a treasure, and when he finds it, he gives up everything he has to buy the field where the treasure is. Or he's like a merchant who's looking for the fine jewel, and when he finds the best jewel of them all, he sells all of his other jewels just to have that one. This is what the pursuit of wisdom is like. It's intended to take you back to the preciousness of being in the presence of God. that it gives you this sense of joy of being at home with God. Verse 15 describes how it enables you to prosper. She is more precious than jewels, and verse 16, nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. And what is described here is this double-handed blessing. Right and left hands just pouring out more and more blessing. That Eden was intended to be a place where you would prosper, where God had put all the trees of the field and all of the grass and all of the shrubs and everything that was good for the eye and pleasing to eat, that Adam and Eve would be there and that they would prosper and that they would flourish. It was God's intention from the very beginning that humanity find a home where we would enjoy life and enjoy God. It's described in verse 17 as her ways are ways of pleasantness. This flourishing garden that God had, I just read from Psalm 16, verse 11. It had this idea of not only just being full of pleasantness, you can imagine the fragrances and the goodness of it, but also the sense, Psalm 16, verse 11, when it describes at your right hand are pleasures evermore, that literally could be at your right hand are Edens forevermore. God had designed Eden to be a home where you would enjoy and flourish in the pleasantness of all that God had, all of who God is and all of the blessings that He had. And wisdom then becomes like this. It becomes like this great thing that you find profit. It's precious. It makes you prosper. It's pleasant. And the final one that we see in verse 17 and moving into verse 18, all her paths are peace. So Eden was intended to be a place where God's rule dominated. That Adam was to come to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and to seek out the Lord, and there he would find that there God had given life. And how does Proverbs 3:18 end? It ends this section by saying, and she is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. And those who hold her fast are called blessed. You see, we're longing for Eden. We're longing for home. We're longing for profit and preciousness. We're longing for prosperity and pleasantness and peace. And yet we know that there's something wrong in this world. We know that there's something wrong in this world because we don't experience those things continually. The fact that we find happy places and we can't stay there, it's an indication that we were made for something more than this. We were designed, we were built, we were created to know more than just this life and the daily grind. We were made for Eden. And God had designed the world in such a way that His design was so that we would know life and joy and peace. He is calling us, Eden is calling us back to the happy place. The question is, are you going to seek it? The way that we begin to seek it is that first we return to Eden, but the second thing is we have to live consistently with the order of the good life. We have this little break after this hymn of blessing, verses 13 through 18, where we come to then this ode to creation, if you would, in verses 19 and 20. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding He established the heavens. By His knowledge the deeps broke open, and the clouds dropped down the dew. And what we have here suddenly is this interlude to creation. The threefold design of the universe as the Jewish mindset would have understood. The heavens, the earth, and the deeps of the sea. That God had created all of this. And that in God creating all of these things, what He had done is He had created it by embedding His knowledge and His wisdom into creation. We'll see this in chapter 8, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because chapter 8 really unpacks this little section right here. Chapter 8, verses 21 through the end of the chapter, it's going to unpack all of these ideas. But the basic principle here is that God has embedded His wisdom into creation. And that when you live consistently with how God has created the world, it creates a flourishing for you. That when you live inconsistently with God's design, it creates anxiety, depression, discouragement, despair. God has designed this world so that it's a good world. It's a world that we can find pleasure in and joy in and delight in. But when we don't live consistently with God's ways, what we find is that the environment is disrupted, the climate is disrupted, our work is disrupted, our relationships are disrupted. And the design here is that God has ordered all of creation. But while sin has come into the world and disrupted it, there is an order that you can live by. And so it is absolute folly for humanity to say, I can choose to be whatever I want to be. We can't be whatever we want to be. That's the damning lie of this generation. We've been sold a bill of goods that actually isn't false, that's not true, it's false. You can't be whatever you want to be. You have to live within the order of God's design and His creation and the limits. And that if you fight against those limits, and if you fight against your own biology, and if you fight against who God has made you to be, it does not lead you to the flourishing life. It never will. God has designed this world with an order, that His wisdom is embedded in it. And then when we live consistently with that order, it leads to joy and life and flourishing. And so we have to live consistently with the order of the good life that God has embedded into creation. In probably February or March, we'll unpack Proverbs 8, and we're going to see how wisdom is just in everything that exists in this world. But for now, what we need to see is that God has created this world so that we might live consistently with His order and His good design. It is His creation, the heavens, the earth, and the seas. And it's intended to create a wonder. We don't get the sense of wonder in these verses because we're so familiar with the day-to-day life cycles and weather cycles that we just don't appreciate verse 20 when it says, by His knowledge the deeps broke open and the clouds dropped down the dew. We don't think anything of it living between the Great Lakes, do we? We kind of complain about how much rain we sometimes get. But in the Middle East, for the clouds to pass over the Mediterranean Sea and to pick up that moisture, and for the moisture to be taken and then to be dropped gently as dew on the land would have been life-giving and amazing to anyone who lived there. To anyone who lived in a climate that was not flourishing with life, but dry and dusty. Every drop of moisture. The fact that salt water could be picked up from the Mediterranean, and instead of salt just being dropped everywhere, that it would be dispersed gently, and that dew would fall and it would nourish the ground. We fail to appreciate the wonder of living in a world where God sustains us day by day by His creative order. This is God's wisdom. God's embedded His wisdom into creation. It's all around us. Everywhere you look, if you have eyes to see, if you will pursue wisdom, as verse 13 said, if you will be like the Adam who searches it out diligently, then you'll find blessing. And so God is calling us back to Eden, that we would return there so that we would live consistently with the order that He has designed that would lead us to the good life. And when we find that, the third thing that I want us to see from verses 21 through 26 is that we need to keep discerning the secure life. Now, this whole section, again, just continues to drive us back to Eden if we have eyes to see and if we have ears to hear. You notice in the beginning of verse 21, at the end of verse 26, we have the same word. My son, do not lose sight of these. Keep, that's the key word, keep sound wisdom and discretion. Verse 26, for the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. Bookending this section, like two bookends that hold the shelf together, is this word keep. It's intended first that we keep sound wisdom and discretion. And that the call here is that we would keep what Adam failed to keep. In Genesis 2:15, we're told that Adam was to tend and to keep the garden. This was his job. He was to protect the garden. He was to nourish the garden. He was to be cultivating the garden. But instead of listening to the voice of God and obeying the command, "You shall not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for on the day that you eat of it, you will surely die," he didn't do his job. He didn't tend and keep the garden. Instead, he let a serpent in, a serpent that he should have just taken the shovel and gone whack. All would have been good. We'd be living in peace and security and joy right now. We'd be in the happy place. But he didn't do that. Instead, he thought that there was something better. He listened to a talking snake. Now, anybody who listens to a talking snake, you know that they're going to be in big, big trouble. But that's precisely what he and Eve did. They listened to the talking serpent. Did God really say? You see, the very first thing that the serpent does is he questions whether or not God's ways are good. He casts doubt on the very principles of who God is. And as he casts doubt on that, he creates chaos. And what Adam failed to do is that he failed to discern good from evil. This is what he was supposed to do. This is why he wasn't to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He was to come to that tree. He was to come to that tree seeking God, that God would show him good and evil. That he would discern that God had said one command only. And instead of obeying the life-giving command of God, he disregarded it, and by disregarding it, and instead of coming to discern good from evil, he failed in his task, and he was thrown out of the happy place. But Solomon, who writes this book, we're told in chapter 1, verse 1, that these are the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of King David. Solomon, this son of peace, that's what Solomon's name means. Solomon came, and when he became ruler over Israel, what did he do? He asked the Lord in 1 Kings 3, verses 9 and 10, "Lord, would you give me the ability to discern good from evil?" And in discerning good from evil, what he was now seeking to do is set up another generation of leadership of Israel, these kings and these noble officials, to be able to discern good from evil. This was the task of every king. It was the task of Adam. And it's the task for you and me. The task that we're called to keep on living and securing the happy place and the good life, is that you have to discern the difference between good and evil. God can give you the command, "Thou shalt not murder." But what gets your heart from being in the happy place to wanting to kill someone? That's where wisdom fits in. That's where we need to understand that, as Jesus said, it's anger that actually is murderous. That we need more than just the commands of God so that we would have life. What we need is we need the wisdom of God to know how those commands move from "thou shalt not" to a destruction of life. We need the wisdom so that we learn how to live wisely and apply the principles of God so that we can live skillfully. Because there's no happy place apart from the knowledge of God and who He is. And throughout these verses, we're told that when you keep discerning and keep on keeping on with sound wisdom and discretion, then what happens is that your entire being is cared for. It's adorned around your neck. Your soul finds life. Your feet are secure. There's the sense that your whole being is actually taken care of. That this peace that was spoken of in chapter 3, verse 17, this peace that God offers is not just the absence of conflict, but shalom here is the concept of a whole wellness, of a whole being that is good and flourishes. And so this section then is giving you the sense that even when you lie down and sleep, verse 24, that you can sleep with your head on the pillow at night, knowing that God rules and reigns, and that you are walking consistently with Him. That all hell can break loose in this world, but you can put your head down on the pillow at night and sleep. Because God cares for you, He loves you, He is working for your good, He is working for your life. And this idea of going back to chapter 3:18, the tree of life, this tree of life, it's brought up at several points. It's brought up in Genesis 2, verse 9. It's brought up in Genesis 3:17. It's brought up again also here in Proverbs chapter 3, and also in Proverbs 13, verse 12, and Proverbs 15, verse 4. It will appear at the end of the Bible. But here it's appearing, telling us that the one who is careful with his tongue is the one who finds the tree of life. And the one who pursues God, Proverbs 13:12 tells us, is the one who finds that all of his delights are met in God as the tree of life. And at the end of the Bible, what we find is that this tree of life is the tree that gives healing to the nations in Revelation 22. That this is the very way that God has designed and ordered. He's bringing us all the way back home. He's taking us home. And He wants us to get there. He wants us to live the blessed life. He wants us to live consistently with His order. He wants us to live consistently with creation. And that requires that we grow in discerning how we keep this. We have to fight vigilantly to keep on the path of life. Because we live in a world of death. And we live in a world of death where we're not just aiming for heaven to just get to heaven and then it'll be all good. What Proverbs is aiming is that we would begin to experience the realities of the tree of life now. That the tree of life exists in the future, but it also exists for our blessing now. That we can't experience all the joys of Eden now, but we can begin to taste them and long for home and long for that happy place and live in light of that happy place here and now. And what Proverbs then wants to do is to teach us, how do you live for the happy place now? That all hell can break loose and all chaos can be going on around you, and that you can even experience, as we saw last week in Proverbs 3, verses 11 and 12, the discipline of the Lord, and still know that you are secure in the love of God who dearly cares for you. He wants us to live securely in His steadfast love, which is what we saw at the beginning of chapter 3, verse 3. And He wants us to live now for the happy place and forever. And what that produces is what we see in the last section from verses 27 to 35, is that it enables us to humbly do good. Verses 25 and 33 kind of function with this sense of kind of triggering and notifying us that there are some commands that we need to be mindful of. It tells us in verse 25 and in verse 33 to be mindful of the wicked and not to be envious, because they'll be ruined. The wicked will be destroyed. That God will laugh and scoff at the scoffer. And so in the midst of this, there are these commands to do good. There's 5 commands that are given in verses 27, 28, 29, 30, and 31, and they're paired each 2 verses. So let's take a look at how these 5 commands are worked out. First, there's the command of verses 27 and 28. We're told there, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. Don't say to your neighbor, go and come again, tomorrow I will give it, when you have it with you. Here the principle of the law is fleshed out, where Leviticus 19, verse 13, and Deuteronomy 24, verses 14 and 15 said, pay the wages of a person promptly. Don't withhold wages. Here the principle is taken even further. If you have the ability to do good to someone and they need your good, don't say, I'll take care of it tomorrow. Do it now. Do the good that God has prepared for you. This is Ephesians 2:10, that God has prepared good works for us to do, that we should walk in them. And the plan is that when He presents you with the opportunity, you do good now. Notice the context. It's to your neighbor. You see that? It says that you're to do good to your neighbor. And Jesus fleshed this idea out for us when he said that there was a man, he told a story, there was a man in Luke 10 who was going from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and as he was on his way, he was beaten up by a bunch of thugs, a band of robbers, and he was left for dead. And that as he was on his way and then left for dead, beaten up, robbed, and lying there to die, along came different types of Jewish religious leaders who neglected him and failed to do good. But then we're told that a Samaritan, someone who is ethnically different, someone who is religiously different, came by and he saw this Jewish man beaten up on the road, and he put him on his donkey, took him to an inn, and paid for his needs, and said, I'll come back, and if there's any more costs, I'll do good. And Jesus asked, who then was the neighbor? The neighbor is the one who did good, but I want you to notice something about the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan didn't assume that he had to do everything, right? He didn't have the ability, he didn't have medical skills apparently. He had to take the man to a place where he could receive medical care. But what he did do is he took this Jewish man, a man that he would have not been friends with, a man whose religion was different than him, and he sought to do him good by paying for his bills, coming back and ensuring that he was taken cared for. And this is the principle that even though each one of us, we have limitations, let's acknowledge it. I can't do all good to all people at all times everywhere. I have my limitations. There's only so much money that I have. There's so much time that I have. There's only so much strength that I have. There's so many hours in a day that I have. But as opportunity presents, what is the good that I can do to my neighbor? The second principle comes from verses 29 and 30, that I live for my neighbor's good. It says, do not plan evil against your neighbor who dwells trustingly beside you. Do not contend with a man for no reason when he has done you no harm. In other words, don't cause problems. As much as it depends upon you, as the Apostle Paul would say in Romans 12, live at peace with all men. And living at peace with all men, it does not mean avoid conflict only. Remember, the idea of peace here has this idea of whole well-being, of wholeness, of goodness. It's of shalom. And so instead of creating a difficulty for your neighbor, what if we were known as the people in our neighborhoods who are trying to work for the good of our neighbors, who are looking out for our neighbors, who are caring for our neighbors, who are serving our neighbors? The widow who's next door, the single mom who's down the street, the couple who's just gone through a hard time. What kind of community does that produce? You see, I think, I could be wrong in this, but I think that a lot of what Christianity has tried to produce in the 20th century is what individual Christians don't want to do on their own. We want churches to do what we won't do. What we're called to do is not have bigger programs and bigger events and bigger ideas. We're called to be that neighbor, the neighbor who lives next door and who does good. And when Christians have functioned like that in the world, it has been explosive for the power of the gospel to go forward. When Christians have worked for the good of their neighbor, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their religion, regardless of their background, whatever it is, when Christians have worked for their good, instead of trying to do that which protects, is self-protecting, but when Christians have worked for the good of those around them, instead of contending with a man for no reason when he's done you no harm, to work to build trust. This is the principle of creating community wherever we are. And it's the mindset that Christians have had when the gospel has flourished. It's not been about the programs and the institution of the church. It's been about Christians being the church in every sphere of life. And the final principle of doing good is that we're told to be content. Verses 31 and 32. Don't envy a man of violence and choose any of his ways, for the devious, or literally the crooked person, is an abomination to the Lord, but the upright are in his circle of confidence. Here the principle is most basically that by being jealous of those who do evil and who prosper because they are doing wrong is folly. That the person who is on the crooked path will not experience the blessing of God. That's why verse 32, for the devious person, literally the crooked person, they've been on the crooked path. But the one who trusts in the Lord with all his heart and doesn't lean on his own understanding, what does he find? As he acknowledges God, all his ways are made straight. And this is all intended to be done with the knowledge that God will deal with evil. Verse 33, the Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the dwelling of the righteous. Towards the scorners he is scornful, but to the humble he gives favor. And this is where the New Testament picks up verse 34. James picks it up in James 4, verse 6, and Peter picks it up in 1 Peter 5:5. God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. That's right here. That's where that idea comes from. That there is this contrast between the one who is crooked versus the one who is upright. There is the contrast between the wicked versus the righteous in verse 34. There is the contrast between the wise who receive honor, this sense of glory, of heaviness, but fools get light, what is disgraced. It is nothing weighty. Because all of these things are intended to show us and help us to see the glory of Christ. And as we see the wisdom of Christ, we all recognize we all want to be happy. We all want the happy place. We all want to live there. We cling to it. In fact, people are so afraid of death that they will do whatever is possible to avoid the dying things of this world. That's why we'll neglect the elderly and put them into places where we don't have to see them or to be bothered by them. Because it bothers us to see death. We'll do everything possible to cling and to hold on to life. We fear death, and so we act in irrational ways that are totally bizarre. But when we see that Christ is our wisdom, as the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1:30, that Christ is our wisdom. He is the wisdom of God. It does not cause us to fear death. It doesn't cause us to try and hold on to the happy place here and now as though if I don't get it now, then I'm not going to have the happy life. People today live as though the happy life here is the only life that is. Eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow we die, and so there's no happiness. But that's the mindset of one who doesn't understand the wisdom of the cross. For the wisdom of the cross, Paul says, is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the wisdom and the power of God. Why is it? Because we have a Savior, an Adam, who came, who left the happy place, who left the happy home. And in leaving that happy home, he came and he took on all suffering and pain and torture. He took on the curse of sin and death, and he took your punishment for sin. And he died. And it was for the joy set before him that he endured its cross, and he endured the shame, and he mocked that shame. And he could leave his happy place. Why? Because he knew that in the wisdom of God, what looks like foolishness and folly and stupidity to this world is actually the power of God. Because the power of God and the wisdom of God is in the cross. It's in the one who leaves his home. It's in the one who leaves his comfort. It's in the one who goes and serves humbly and does what is good. That's when you come back to Eden. That's when you find that you can live consistently with God's order. That's when you discover that God has prepared good for you to do, and that no matter how hard it is, that we work for heaven now because heaven awaits. Because the one who left heaven is the one who has come, and he has told us, do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many rooms, and if it were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again. And I will take you to be where I am, so that where I am, you may be also. When Jesus told his disciples this, in John 14, we're told that Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going. Jesus said, you know the way, because I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. You see, the way back to the happy place is the way through Jesus. That Jesus is the one who secures you so that you can live. He'll take you back to Eden. And he'll restore your soul so that you can live consistently with the order that God has designed in this universe so that you might delight and enjoy him forever. Church, let's learn that it is in daily life that we commend the gospel. It is in our neighborly relations that we show that there is a happy place now and forever. And let us find him who takes us, who's prepared that place for us, and who will take us there so that we could dwell securely with him now and forever. So, Lord, we do pray and we do ask that we might learn to live in light of all of your goodness. That as Proverbs is driving us back to Eden, it's also driving us forward to that day where we will know happiness forever. Have mercy upon us, O God, according to your unfailing love. Forgive us of our sins. Where we have wandered and strayed, where we have turned from you, would you return us so that we might come to you and know joy forever. At your right hand are pleasures, Edens, forevermore. Which is what we long for, to be with you, both now and always, which is why we come in the name of your Son. Amen.